I want first to thank Pastor Hagi for the amazing, arousing speech. I want to do three things in brief comments before the panel. And one is to say what we now know, what happened on the night leading to October 7. Then to say a word about why this is tied to the conceptia, to the conception that led to the failure, and it led directly to the failure. And the third thing, put this in context, in the general struggle against the woke, which I think Prime Minister Netanyahu is bent on. Because Prime Minister Netanyahu is not just engaged in winning this war, he is also, as an intellectual, cognizant of the fact that this war plays a vital part in the worldwide struggle against the woke. And the way that we frame it is crucial for the whole of the West, not just for Israel's future. So, you probably know that the affidavit, that the response of the Prime Minister to Ronen Bar's affidavit has been published yesterday, and it has confirmed what we have been saying, at least I've been saying on my podcast since March 3rd. So I think we should start there. We now know what happened on the night before dawn broke on October 7. It was not just a mistake in analyzing intelligence data, but a whole worldview that led Chief of Shin Bet, Ronen Bar, to interpret accumulating signs of the gathering storm exactly backwards. He feared that Hamas was nervous about an impending Israeli attack. This seems to be the reason that on Bar's advice, the level of alert was not raised, and the soldiers in the bases around the fence were left to be slaughtered in their beds, unaware of the growing danger. The Nova party, as you know, was also not dispersed. It seems that Bar was bent on reassuring Hamas that Israel was harboring no ill intent. He did this by exposing our jugular. It's just unbelievable. This is the way he wanted to signal Hamas that we are not on the offense. Long before the war, Bar had convinced himself that Hamas was moderating and that they wanted at least a prolonged hudna, a state of non-belligerent status quo. This is why he was one of the main advocates of stepping up economic concessions that would, he was sure, encourage what he believed to be the already dominant trend of moderation in Hamas circles. The flip side of this view was that Bar was always hyper-suspicious about the Israeli right, which is why under his leadership the Jewish division of the Shin Bet was so aggressive towards the settlers and so indifferent to their human rights. We were recently exposed to the shocking leaked telephone calls between the head of this division and Avishai Moalem, chief of the Judea and Samaria police. In these calls, the Shin Bet has been requesting months of administrative detention for settlers without a shred of evidence to go on. When Moalem protested, he was told by Shabak that he should create the appearance of a real investigation. Given Bar's instinctive sense that Israel, not Hamas, would be the source of trouble, it would not be far-fetched to speculate that this is why he did not wake up the Prime Minister on the night leading to the disaster. He probably worried that a hawkish Prime Minister would sound the alarm, thus reinforcing what he thought was Hamas's fear of an Israeli attack and possibly drag us all into what Bar must have thought of as an unintended escalation, possibly a regional war. We know this way of thinking because in Shin Bet parlance, there is a term for it, miscalculation. It was explained in the Prime Minister's affidavit. I recommend everyone to read it or read the translation of it to English. Miscalculation was their explanation for previous rounds of violence, which they thought were Israel's fault. Israel allegedly responded to ambiguous intel too aggressively and thus led to armed conflict which the Shin Bet assumed Hamas did not want. In retrospect, they were wrong all along in their interpretations. So you can now see the bigger picture. In Bar's mind, the Israeli right is the problem and the Palestinians are the solution. The Israeli right is the enemy of peace and Hamas is our future partner. He was standing on the night of the attack, like all other nights, with his back to Gaza and his face to Jewish settlers in Judea and Samaria. This is, in other words, the Oslo frame of mind. How can you still believe in Oslo after such an abysmal record of failure? You need to believe in the Palestinian partner, and therefore you have to assume that the collapse of the process was Israel's fault. Ergo, the right is the problem. This, I think, is Barr's basic worldview, and it still informs his behavior now. He refuses to obey the elected right-wing cabinet that dismissed him because he still sees his job as protecting us from the Israeli right, not from Hamas. You can hear this refrain in all the anti-Bibi protests. You can hear it, by the way, on Channel 12 from the mouth of Guy Peleg. Hamas will be able to deal with, but the real danger, they say over and over again, is Benjamin Netanyahu. Any sober observer of the international scene will recognize the underlying conception which such views are anchored in. We can say a woke conception for short, or we can say the post-colonial studies version, we can say the Edward Said view, or we can say identity politics or multiculturalism. All these lead directly to the same view of the conflict. Israel, being Western, is ipso facto the guilty side, and the Palestinians are naturally the colored victims. If you zoom out, you will see that the battle over how to frame the conflict and the war is embedded in the larger controversy now convulsing all democracy, a battle over the future of the credo of the West. This is why the battle over framing began as soon as the war itself began. All its components existed, in fact, before the war. The woke did not have to wait for Palestinian deaths, which we now were exposed, the lies were now exposed in the press. You can see it all over Twitter now. They did not have to wait for the Palestinian death count to know which party is guilty and which is the victim. Trained in post-colonial studies and versed in identity politics, hostility to Zionism is not just instinctive to the woke. It is the litmus test by which they decide who is on the right side of history. The Palestinians are, on this view, native people of color, and the Jews are European whites who colonized their land. With the dispossession of Native Americans now relegated to the past, slavery extinct in the West, and the European rule in the Far and Middle East long gone, only Zionism perpetuates Western sins. Israel is, on this view, a rearguard action of Western colonialism, the last vestige of a retrograde evil ideology. Demanding its destruction is therefore a ritual of atonement. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu understood full well that the battle over framing the war is one more act in the struggle over the legitimacy of Zionism. This means that insisting on the moral justification of the war is also a demand to scrape the whole map with which Western progressive elites make sense of the world, including their own domestic politics. Netanyahu therefore described the war in diametrically opposite terms, and we should pay attention to the exact terms that he used. Far from being a relic of the bad old colonial past, Israel is paving the way for a better future. It is a trailblazer. It is the front line of Western civilization in the war against barbarism. Here's the direct quote. "If you remember one thing from this speech," said Netanyahu, "remember this." It's his speech before the joint session of the two houses of Congress. "Our enemies are your enemies. Our fight is your fight. And our victory will be your victory." He reiterated similar themes in his UN speech, where he spoke of the savage murderers who are out to destroy our common civilization. This is the exact opposite of multicultural speak, where you respect the other side. The other side is not a civilization, they are barbarians. He also referred to the woke protesters against his presence on Capitol Hill and those carrying Gays for Gaza placards. "I have a message for these protesters, he said. When the tyrants of Tehran who hang gays from cranes and murder women for not covering their hair are praising, promoting, and funding you, you have officially become Iran's useful idiots. Wokeism is an autoimmune disease. It attacks our ability to defend our values. Its moral relativism first asserts the equality of all cultures, then lets anti-Western values into its midst through the gateway of boundless tolerance, and finally, it inverts anti-racist morality by using Western guilt to forbid any criticism of racist, misogynist, anti-gay, anti-Semitic, anti-Western ideologies, so long as those come from those who are designated and sanctified as victims. The damage it causes through this moral inversion is everywhere the same. It is what led British authorities to legitimize grooming gangs in the name of community relations. It is what led students to support the genocide of Jews in the name of anti-racism. It is what led courts to send rapists into women's jails, and what authorized the sterilization of children in the name of gender affirmation. It has also led the International Court in The Hague to argue that Israel, not Hamas, should be tried for genocide. It reached the height of absurdity with Judith Butler, a feminist oracle, defending the sadistic barbarian rape and mutilation of Jewish women as armed resistance. Netanyahu's mission was, of course, not to argue the fine points of queer theory with Judith Butler or to point out the contradictions in Edward Said, but his instinct for calling out relativism went right to the heart of a global problem. This is not a clash of civilizations, he told Congress, referring to the famous book. It is a clash of barbarism with civilization. It is a clash between those who glorify death and those who sanctify life. Final word. Not all values are created equal. We will not be able to defend ours if we continue to assume Obama-era sanitized language and talk about radical extremism instead of calling jihadi terrorists like Hamas and grooming gangs in Britain the murderers at the Charlie Hebdo journal in France or the assassins of gay director Theo van Gogh in Holland by the name that describes them as what they really are, barbarian jihadists, enemies of civilization. Israel is now fighting, thank you. Israel is now fighting not only against a military enemy, but also waging a cultural war against a constellation of lopsided human rights organizations, think tanks and NGOs, biased international tribunals, woke newspapers, media outlets and social media platforms, corrupt universities, and peace processors who are trying to tie our hands. We need to win the military war despite their best efforts to stop us, because it is crucial to demonstrate that liberal democracy indeed does not have to commit suicide. Thank you.